Hello, everybody. Welcome. Thanks for joining us. I am Chris P, and today I'm joined by my good friend Steve Davis and our special guest, Dr. Rachell Lindvall of the Mindful Project. Welcome, both of you.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me today. I appreciate it.
Brilliant. So, Rachell, share your story with us. Tell us about your journey.
Well, I started off, going to school for athletic training actually as an undergraduate and sports medicine, and then got into college coaching with my husband right out of finishing my playing career, and just really found a passion for helping my athletes go beyond what they thought that they were capable of. And I found pretty early on that that was more than just the physical, right? So this was kind of the early 2000s when I started my coaching career, because I'm hit at 20 years now of college coaching. And I really saw, the athletes that could kind of look at things differently. That mental side really could do so much more than they thought they were capable of. So that really piqued my interest, and I just really had a passion for just investing in them. As much as I love the game, I that much more loved investing in them as people. And so that just really kind of set me on my journey as far as learning more about like sports psychology and just the mental training side of things. And in 2007, I had the honor of spending about 10 days with former national team coach April Heinrichs, and then also Dr. Colleen Hacker, who has worked with U.S. women's soccer, U.S. women's hockey, and then many other professional athletes and Olympians over the years. And just got to spend a week or about 10 days with them, just learning more about the mental side of the game and how I could better help my athletes. And that promoted me to go ahead and pursue a master's degree in exercise science and sports psychology. So I just kept taking those tools, and the more tools I had to pass on to my players, the more success I saw from them, which just really excited me, because I was like, yes, I can give them things that help them not only do better on the field, but can help them for life. I would have athletes, call me or text me or email me years later and say, man, like, that thing you did with me, that mental tool, that helped me get through my PT school final, or my med school, things I was doing in med school, that really helped me, or just something challenging in their life. So then after finishing my master's degree, started teaching, and was able to invest in my students as well as my athletes, which again, that's just my thing. I love investing in people. And so I pursued a doctoral degree, and in my doctoral degree, I actually was looking at pursuing just kind of the stress and anxiety that I was seeing in so many of my athletes. With coaching for 20 years, you kind of see the change in athletes over 2 decades, and I just started observing so much more stress, anxiety, fear of failure, and with the mental tools I had, I was trying to help them, and it just seemed like something was missing. I was just not able to help them as well as I used to. And so, same thing in the classroom. I was noticing the same thing in the classroom. So, with my doctoral research, I thought, well, let me see if this is a thing or if this is just me. I'm getting older, and so I no longer can connect. Right? So, I started researching, and the research showed that stress and anxiety and depression and fear of failure, all of these things have been going through the roof in the last, 5 to 7 to 10 years in kids all the way up through these college students. And so basically I realized it wasn't just me. And so the more research I did on stress and anxiety and depression, the more I saw mindfulness as kind of this thing that studies being used to reduce the stress and anxiety and reduce this depression. And the results were incredible. I started looking at it specifically with athletes and looking at it with youth through professional. And the research just kept coming back with great results. And to be honest, going into this, I'd heard of mindfulness, I was aware of it, but I kind of was skeptical. And mindfulness, for those who may be new to this, the concept is just paying attention on purpose in a non-judgmental way, or paying attention in the present moment on purpose in a non-judgmental way. And it kind of felt ambiguous to me. I was like, okay, but can that really do all of these things? And the more I researched, the more I realized why it was so effective. And I think you have some questions coming up that I can get into that a little bit more. But that's kind of what led me from, an undergraduate to where I am now, as a co-founder of the Mindful Project and just as a university professor and a mental coach that I've worked with other university teams as well, besides mine. So I don't know if that's the long version or the short version, but that's kind of my journey to where I'm at now.
Well, it's your version, so we'll take it. And thank you for sharing. There was quite a bit to unpick in there, but obviously, you said that you saw a rise in depression over the last 20 years, anxiety, fear of failure, and then especially over the last 5, 7, 10 years. What do you think were the causes in that, right? Number one, and what prompted you to dig deeper? And obviously, I think it's your passion of people and helping people, which happens to be our core value this month, passion. But tell us, just dig a little deeper there if there was a question in there, which I phrased, I think, quite poorly. So I'll be more mindful of that.
So good. I think that some of the causes, as we're looking at the research, I think social media has been a huge part of that, which is this weird thing to talk about right now because social media is how we're kind of actually able to still connect. But it also has had this fear of failure with social media is the fact that if you do something and you fail at it, you can be shamed for it with thousands of people watching, right? So I think there becomes this different sort of pressure that this generation is feeling that previous generations. I think too the access to so many things via the internet. I think there's a higher expectation that we get it right the first time. I think that because I was talking about this, I can't remember which, I was doing another presentation, I can't remember which one that it was, but we were talking about the fact that when I was in school, the internet was still relatively new. That's how old I am, right? And we had to go to the library. And so the expectations of our professors was different because we pretty much only had access to what books were in the library for what we could find. And so now that students can find anything all over the world, the expectation is higher. And so I think they feel that, or even athletically, it's like you got to have, a special coach for this and a special coach for that. And if you don't, then, there's this element of a hierarchy when it comes to socioeconomic, like, well, my parents can afford, 5 extra coaches to work with me in addition to my club team. And I think that kind of stuff makes kids maybe feel like, well, if I can't do that, then I'm a failure. And I think those are just a few things, but I think those are a few of the things that have kind of resulted in this more of a fear of failure, this expectation to get things right the first time instead of the natural, normal process of growing through things. And failure is a part of that. It's a big part of that. And I think, maybe we as coaches and we as teachers and educators, maybe we have inadvertently kind of given that impression that they need to get it right the first time without realizing it. So I think there's a lot of factors, and those are probably just a few of them. I might have wandered there. I'm not sure if I completely answered what you're asking.
Yeah, but you know what though? It was the question. I wasn't a very good guide, but the same question came in from Barry Webb. Is it from peers? Is it from parents and stuff like that? But I think you answered that. Steve, I'm going to turn over for one of your questions, and then I'll come back because I have a couple of things I want to go down as well. So,
yeah. Well, I think it's interesting a couple of the points that you made there, Rachel, because just on Tuesday, Chris and I jumped into one of Chris's webinars and we talked about the pressure that's put on players to succeed immediately, whereas I prefer my players to fail first time around. Chris uses the term FAIL, which is first attempt in learning. I want them players to understand that this is what failure looks like, this is what it feels like, and now how do we work our way up from it as opposed to hitting rock bottom and staying there. So it's great that you pointed that out. The social media component of it, one of the things I like to stress is that that's forever. Once you've posted something, you own it. If you retweet something, you own it. You're putting your name on it, and that doesn't go away. People can delete a tweet, but somebody's already taken a screenshot. It's there. So again, we got to remember, be mindful of what we post because it's going to be there forever. But in terms of the anxiety, the depression, that fear of failure, the lack of emotional control, low self-esteem, all of that as it gets tied in, how important is it for us as coaches and leaders in our sports to create an environment that builds culture using team agreed upon standards and behaviors? And what are the benefits of such an environment?
I think it's vital. Excuse me. I think it's vital because first of all, everything's always changing, right? And if a player, whether that's their home environment or their school environment, if they step into the team environment and they know what the expectation is, then that essentially gives them the freedom, and especially if that expectation is that we fail to get better, right? We fail because we're giving our best, and that only way we know the way we can improve is by pushing so far that we fail so we can learn from that. If they know that that's the expectation, and in a good way expectation, then it creates this environment to where they can actually be at their best. If teammates are, instead of laughing at someone for messing up, they're saying like, hey, next time, right? Or giving them some sort of encouragement that they actually gave their best and it was a failure that time, then I think that allows them to kind of take those defenses down a little bit. And that takes time, right? I mean, that takes time because kids are coming in, they're used to having to throw up walls of defense from verbal, just, no one knows, to say abuse, but just basically verbal jabs, right? That they're used to getting from their teammates. Maybe they're used to getting them from other coaches that they've had before. And so if you're having to basically throw up those defense shields, you're not going to be able to put all of your attention, and that comes back to that mindfulness thing, you're not going to be able to put all of your attention into actually what you're doing. So having that culture where everyone as a part of that team says, I know that when I step into this culture, this is who we are. I like to call them basically who we are statements. It's not just rules. This is what makes us us, and this is why we're different. I coach. We live near Notre Dame, and I coach at Notre Dame camps in the summer. And I only have kids for like 3 or 4 days, but the first day we sit down and we start doing who we are. Like, we're only going to play like 5 games together, and we're together for 3.5 days, but we are making a team culture because it allows them to be able to thrive, even if it's for 3.5 days, and gives them that chance to, put down some of those defense walls. And it actually is really cool to see students, you're coming and you're sitting in your little group for the first time at Notre Dame camp, and they, are kind of like nervous, heads kind of down, shoulders kind of rolled forward. And the more we talk about who we are statements, and for me, who we are is we fail to get better. We encourage each other when we fail. We're not negative with each other. That doesn't mean we can't give constructive criticism, but we're not ripping on each other, right? Like, we are this team that we have each other's back no matter what. And they don't know each other, and all of a sudden those shoulders start coming up and those heads start coming up. It's just that amazing thing of what that culture can do, and what it can allow athletes to actually, the progress that they can actually have. And it really moves that ceiling of potential significantly up. Again, I don't know if I watered or if I answered your question.
Steve, you want to ask your next question? There's questions coming in. So if you see me looking away, please notice that it's, I am being mindful.
One of the things I've been a staunch supporter of is return to play protocols, enforcing them, not rushing somebody back. And when I listened to the webinar that you and Erin were on, you talked about the increase in injuries due to anxiety. And there's also a increase in the time it takes to return to play from an injury because of it. How much of that do you think is coach driven? How much is player driven, parent driven, or is it a combination of them all?
I think it's a combination of them all, but let me make a distinction here. As far as when I say combination, the player driven side of things is because of what they've been taught, if that makes sense, from the parent or from the coach or both. Because essentially if they are really, really pushing to get back, it could be for a few reasons. It could be like, for me, when I was playing, I just loved the game so much. There was no pressure from a parent or a coach or anyone else. I just loved to play so much that I wanted to get back. But I think that there also can be this element of fear, right? That if I'm not playing, I'm going to lose my spot. right? Or if I'm not playing, then who am I on this team, right? So some of that can, I think, come from maybe an expectation that they feel from a parent or a coach, or just a fear that they personally will not be able to rise to the challenge of coming back from that injury. Again, they've lost their spot, or someone else starts doing better. So I think it is a little bit of everything, but I think that coaches and parents are really responsible for helping kids understand the need to recover, the need to actually take time and heal, and the fact that their body, that you only have one, right? And it's hard to grasp that as a kid. It's hard to grasp that, as a high schooler or as a college student. And until you start having things that don't go away, an injury that starts plaguing you, you don't really kind of start to get that mindset. And so that's where coaches and players and athletic trainers, sports medicine, physical therapists, doctors, all need to do a little better job with taking care of these kids when they don't have that concept yet, as far as that not everything heals, not everything gets better. So I think that's it. Again, I might be running off course on you there, but I think like it's really a multifaceted thing. And I think, we come to the mindfulness again with the stress, with the anxiety. We have the increased cortisol levels, which I know you had asked about in a question that you sent to me. And that actually reduces their ability to heal, so it's going to take longer. Another thing that stress and anxiety reduces is sleep quality. And so even if they're sleeping, the quality is less, so they're not getting the same healing they could. So if we can help them reduce that stress and anxiety, that's going to reduce those cortisol levels. It's also going to give them better quality sleep. It's going to help them heal faster, which will help them be less frustrated with not being able to return to play as quickly as they would like.
Brilliant. Just on that, we do have questions that have come through, and I've got a couple of my own, but I'm going to ask, this one's from Greg all the way from Missouri. He says, while we're on the topic of Parents' Day, he says, what advice do you have for parents to help build that environment and culture?
Absolutely. I think that, thanks for your question, Greg. I think that one of the hardest things is we all want our kids to be the best they can be, right? We want our kids to have a good time, which oftentimes having a good time is being, the one that's scoring the goals or the one that's getting playing time or whatever. And I think sometimes, this isn't the case for everyone, but sometimes part of that, having a good time and having them be at their best, sometimes we can start to feel like they reflect us. And so if we are pressuring them because we feel like if they are failing on the field, that means we're a failure. I think it's kind of separating those two, because I think some kids can feel that pressure from their parent, because if they have a bad game, or if things aren't going as well, all of a sudden if the parent feels like that their kid is reflecting them, and on the sidelines now, they're not the cool parent because their kid didn't do as well or whatever, I think that that's a real thing. And so I think at home, it's about really fostering that growth mindset, which essentially means that failure exists to make us better. Failure doesn't mean I am a failure. That means I didn't pull that move effectively in the game today, or I hit the ball over the top, or I hit it wide. That doesn't mean I'm a failure. That says, okay, what can I learn from that so that I can get better at it in the future? And I think it starts with, after a game, not talking about the score line as much as talking about how the kid played, right? In the sense of, how do you feel like you played today? What did you feel like you did well? What did you feel like you need to work on? Because so often we get caught up on the score line, and I've been coaching for 20 years, and I have had some of my proudest moments as a coach have been games we've lost. And I'm not saying that I like to lose games. I don't like to lose games, but I have had some games that we have won, and I have not been proud of my team at all. And we've played horribly. And I've had other games where kids played beyond their potential, and we lost, but I could not have been prouder of their performance that day. So I think it's really looking at the process versus the outcome, because we become very outcome focused and we stunt our kids' growth. And so, long version would be, instead of looking at the immediate outcome, looking at the long term and saying, like, how can I help them keep growing? How can I help them view failure as a potential for growth and necessary? And I think that starts with the adults in their life.
Absolutely. And I think just to build off that or add to that, would it be fair to say winning on more than just winning on more than just the scoreboard? So, you know, looking at certain things, and of course it takes communication, right? And thought out communication. So again, Steve, I'll let you ask a quick question. Not I'll let you, but please go ahead, Steve, while I man the chat box and stuff.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we do in US soccer as a US soccer grassroots instructor is we talk about managing the performance environment, and the parents come under that category. So when I think about children, especially at the younger ages, I know they like to mimic, mirror, or reflect behaviors that they see. So listening to you talk about that is great, just to reiterate that for anybody listening. When we talked about the cortisol levels, I read a study about this a good few years back. I think it was from 2007, and it talked about they could pick up on the cortisol levels in the saliva of children being bullied, and then there's a reduced ability to think, learn, and recall any type of information. What advice can you give to myself, Chris, any coach listening, players, and parents on how to recognize anxiety, how to recognize low self-esteem, and then let the parents and the coaches and work with the child to cope, to build coping strategies that they can do together as opposed to just one.
Co-creating, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I think recognizing it is, you know, you're going to see how they respond to instruction. You're going to see how they respond to failure. You're going to see how they respond to, you know, their teammates. I think, you know, kids with low self-esteem are often verbally going to, you know, verbally be negative with themselves. And just, again, body language, posture, you can see how they're responding to something where other kids might respond, you know, may not faze them at all, but this kid, it really impacts them. You know, you can just tell that they are dejected. Or, you know, maybe they're the kid with low self-esteem is lashing out at other teammates before they can be lashed out at, right? Like maybe sometimes the kids with the lowest self-esteem are the ones that you think are too full of themselves, but really they're lashing out first. They're trying to basically like almost be the bully before they get bullied, right? And so I think those are things that you can kind of observe, and again, like how they're viewing failure. If they feel like when they mess up, you know, they just take it so hard, then it's probably because they view that they personally are a failure. And so that's going to be an indication as well of low self-esteem versus the kid that keeps trying and trying and trying to keep getting it. They don't want to try, you know, because they're afraid that it will just show everyone what's truly inside of them. And so I think you can kind of identifying that, but I think that's a part of that team culture, because I think more kids struggle with it than we realize, because sometimes the confident kids have way more of a struggle than we even can imagine. You know, that's even like Erin talked about in her with her experiences, that she really struggled with a lot of these internal feelings of, you know, low self-esteem and fear of failure and all these things, and nobody had any idea. They thought, you know, she's being successful, so she must be fine. And so I think that sometimes we might not see it. So I think the best thing is actually just giving the whole team these tools that basically starts with valuing who they are, because a lot of times, you know, low self-esteem is because we don't value ourselves, right? And I think sometimes it's that tough balance. You don't want them to be too cocky, right? You feel like, well, I don't want to pump them up too much, but ultimately, like, finding things that they like about themselves and valuing themselves. What's great about them? What do they bring to the team? And so kind of helping them see that, because if you have that one kid that maybe everyone wants to be, well, if everyone is that player, your team is not complete, right? So helping them understand what is great about them, what they bring. And then I think also with that team culture, just talking about the fact that you're going to have people in life that are going to bully you or say negative things to you or whatever. And the fact that just because someone says that, it doesn't mean that that's who you are. And helping them be able to stand up for themselves. Obviously, there's scenarios where they need to go talk to someone. I'm not saying they need to take it all themselves, but just essentially helping them have a better understanding and appreciation for their, because that's actually part of our program with the Mindful Project, is actually helping them understand and appreciate their own uniqueness, and valuing themselves. Because if they value themselves, then they are not going to take things to heart the same way that someone will that feels like they are worthless, if that makes sense at all.
Yeah, so just valuing who you are, knowing that everybody is uniquely different, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. This question's come in via text. How many coaches on help their parents understand the culture they create in specific ways to support?
Sorry, I think you cut out the first part of that question.
So how can coaches help their parents understand the culture they create and specific ways that the parents can support the culture?
I think
It
having
might have come in a bit earlier, and I think you touched.
Yeah, no, that's good. I think it's like Steve was talking about, of having, specific things that make up our team, or like I said, who we are statements. I think, at the beginning of the season or wherever you're at when you're wanting to do this, setting those up and saying, this is who we are. And then I think passing that on to parents and saying like, hey, this is who we are as a team. So, if you could, or this week we're really focusing on this, even like right now you have this month you're focusing on passion. Like maybe it's even that communication of, hey, this is what we're focusing on as a team this week or this month, whatever it is. So if when you're talking to your athlete or after games, we really are focusing on this aspect of our game, if you could ask them to reflect on how did they show this in the game. Maybe they didn't play as well as they like or do as well, but did they show this? Maybe you're working on saying like, we as a team, we never quit no matter what. So maybe that's something that like, okay, other things in the game did not go as well as you wanted. Maybe you didn't perform as well as you wanted, but did you quit? No. Okay. Or whatever that is, I think you could kind of guide them in that as far as what you're maybe wanting to focus on. And I think that brings up a good point too. If you're not necessarily working on everything all the time, you have kind of who you want to be as a team, but if everything is new, you might kind of have to focus on something, one at a time for a little bit until you kind of can create this whole total package of who you are as a team. I don't know if that's helpful.
No, yeah, just, what I'm taking from that is always finding the positives, right? So but again, shared communication, you have the shared expectations. Steve and I worked together many years ago at Select, and what we did with Rush Select, where the best players who can afford it come from all around the country, and we go and compete at this event. So what we decided on was, we had the expectations, and it was shared expectations. What do you expect from us as coaches? What do you expect from players? What do you expect from the parents? And then what we had is we asked the players to go and deliver that to the parents. So now there was buy-in. And then at the end of the game, we would talk to the players, we would find the positives, and then we had the parents in behind. And we wouldn't gloss over the things that didn't go well, but it was almost like an after-action review there and then. And, what could we do? And it was mostly the players talking with little prompts by us, So this question's come in from Debbie, and she's got two questions, and so does Barry. And it says, how do you feel the level of competition hinders athletes' mental state? And that's the first part of the question. And the second question is what kind of exercises do you use with players?
The first one, I'm sorry, I think must be my connection. I think you cut out just a little bit. Can you read the first one again? I'm sorry.
Yeah, sorry. It was, and I've deleted it. It says, do you think that the level of competition hinders or helps athletes? So a big game, big stage, is that likely to build? And then what exercises do you use? What mental exercises do you use to keep people present and in the moment? Whether it's, touching the grass, getting the grass between their fingers, snapping a rubber band, whatever.
Well, the first one, as far as do I think level of competition helps or hinders, it depends on the athlete. And I think that comes back to Dr. Carol Dweck's growth versus fixed mindset. And so for people listening that might not be familiar with that, basically, she's in her research has discovered that there are kind of two different ways of looking at things. And it's not like you're born with one or the other. It's just basically how you look at things, and that can change. So it's not set in stone. But a fixed mindset athlete is often not going to rise to the occasion of higher competition because they are more concerned about their failures being revealed. And so they would rather play worse competition. So in a higher competition game, a lot of times they will give less effort because that's their out. They could say if you lost, like, well, I wasn't trying all the way. If I tried all the way, we would have won. And that, so they kind of give themselves that out. Whereas a growth mindset athlete is going to rise to the level of the competition, or because they actually know that playing better competition is going to make them better. And so for a growth mindset athlete, playing tougher competition is the best thing in the world for them. For a fixed mindset athlete, that's where you have that severe fear of failure. You're going to probably have more attitude issues. You're going to see just a lot more stressors and struggles for that fixed mindset athlete, whereas that growth mindset athlete is going to revel in playing that tougher competition. Whether they win or not, they know that they can't get better without playing tougher competition. So it really depends on where that athlete's at, which is where as coaches, if we can really kind of help develop that growth mindset, then we can have our athletes love to play higher competition. Doesn't mean they're not nervous, right? Doesn't mean that they don't feel a little nervous about it, but they know that this is their chance to get better. And as far as mental exercises, sorry, were you going to say something on that?
Yeah, I was going to ask, so once we actually think we have a growth mindset, are we really a fixed mindset? Just
You know, we always can kind of fluctuate between things. Like there's things where I feel like I have a great growth mindset, and then I'll be like, oh, I'm really fixed in this area. I need to work on that. So I think you're right. Yeah, if we're like, I'm growth, then yeah, it can kind of start to think like. But I think it's more the concept of always of just how we look at something, right? Growth mindset says we can always improve. And fixed mindset says, I have what I have, and I don't want you to see my failures.
Yeah, absolutely. So give us some exercises, right? So obviously, some of our objectives today were to upskill the people that are on it about mindfulness, and then give them tools in life, but also in the coaching field.
Right, absolutely. I think some great ones. What we talk about a lot with our, with the Mindful Project and is breathing, and I think that's the first one is breathing in through the nose if you can. For me, sometimes my nose is a little stuffy, but if you can, breathing in through your nose for 3 seconds, exhaling for 4 seconds, and basically that in for 3, out for 4, it actually activates our parasympathetic nervous system, and so it actually lowers our heart rate. And so when we do that, if you can, closing your eyes, you can't always close your eyes depending on where you're at, but if you can, closing your eyes and just feeling what it feels like to have the air go in and out. So not only does it calm our system, it also brings our brain back to the present moment. And so that's a really good one. If you can do a few breaths, that's great. If you only have the opportunity to take one, I mean, you see a lot of pro athletes, or you watch like tennis players right before they do a serve. That's what you usually see them do. In, out, and they do that serve, right?
Unless or you're watching Nadal. Unless you're watching Nadal.
yes. Or before a penalty kick, you see a pro athlete before a penalty kick. You see, or anyone about to go on stage, give a speech. Like a lot of the professionals at any sort of activity, you see that happening because it lowers that heart rate. Lowering our heart rate allows us to think more clearly. So there's a lot behind that, but also just kind of stopping our thoughts from the present, from the past or the future, whatever we're worried about, and just saying, just be right here. For my athletes, I give them those breathing techniques, but also for some of them, we basically tell them to find their reset. So for some of them, if they have, maybe it's adjusting their ponytail, right? Maybe it's adjusting their socks. They kind of find that thing that when they know that their brain is going somewhere where it's not helpful, then finding their thing that works for them. And like you said, for some people, it might be snapping a rubber band or a hair tie or something like that, right? But the breathing technique is physiological, and it can bring you to the present moment, whereas the other ones are not necessarily physiological, but they can help bring your brain to that moment. You can kind of find your thing. Like you said, maybe it's touching the grass, maybe it's adjusting, the cleats or something, but it can be their thing that they know, this is me coming back to the present moment.
Fantastic. Steve, you want to jump in?
Yeah, I think it's because some of the questions here have been about coaches and parents. So I'd say
We actually have players on as well, actually. So thank you for bringing it back around. I said we actually have players on this as well. So thank you for bringing it round.
Great. So we know that there's a correlation between the anxiety of a coach and the performance of a player. So when the coach anxiety increases, athlete performance decreases. What advice can you give to the coaches and athletes that will help them be more mindful of just how important that coach-athlete relationship is?
Absolutely. First of all, breathe, right? I know me on the sidelines, when it's a tight game, and it seems like there's a lot on the line, and I can feel my anxiety. I know that my anxiety is affecting them. So first of all, us taking that breath. I think also realizing again what that challenge of our own growth versus fixed mindset. If you always lose to some other coach and you start to feel like that makes you personally a loser, right? Like there becomes this higher level because you're like, whenever I play that guy or whenever I play that woman, like I always lose or this always happens, and it starts to become personal and it's not about our players anymore, right? And I think that sometimes it's recognizing that we are here to develop our players to help them be at our best. But sometimes we can make it about us. And I think kind of being willing to be humble, because again, I can say the same thing for myself. Sometimes when I get really into something, it's because, man, I really want to beat that team because of the relationship I have or don't have with their coach or the history that our teams have, right? And it becomes about something that's completely different than our players performing at their best. And then my anxiety goes up, and then that negatively impacts my players. Absolutely. And I think for us, it's catching ourselves in those moments. It's not beating ourselves up for it, but just being aware and catching ourselves and being willing to step back, take a breath, and just essentially do everything we can to view it as we would a different game when we don't feel that way. Because I noticed that in myself. I'm like, okay, why am I feeling this way in this game and this way in this game, right? It's I think as coaches, being more self-aware and knowing that is projected onto our players. They can feel it. They're not stupid, right? So they're very in tune with where we are at.
So being more reflective, right? So there's a guy called Mark Bennett who does PDS coaching, and Alan Keane. Alan Keane's a basketball coach of England under 18s or something. And what Alan did was, with his players, he asked one of the players to keep him in check, right? So now, and then what they ask the players to do is keep each other in check. So now, sometimes if the coach is focusing on other things, we miss what players may need. So they use the rule of the three, and then they have this UAE, which is what's unacceptable, what's acceptable, what's exceptional. How long can we keep exceptional for? So Barry's asking, from England, all the way from Cornwall, England, Barry's asking, how can we help individual players help players within the team as well to do this?
Absolutely. And I think that is, as coaches, we're not on the field, we're not on the court. And that's one thing I've talked to my players about, is like, you have to be able to keep each other accountable on the field. And so I think creating that culture to where that's acceptable, right? Like essentially saying, like, if someone is trying to help correct you on the field, permission, like basically they have to know that each other have their best interests at heart, and that basically they have the team's best interests at heart. And so I think it starts with creating that culture. It goes back to those who we are statements, and creating who we are as a team so that it's actually accepted on the field. When someone says, hey, like what my teammates say is, they say, hey, in for 3, out for 4. In the Mindful Project, we have a little cartoon character called Sid. And it was funny because early in our last season, it was one of our freshmen, so she'd only been, part of our team for just a few weeks. And we were really working on this team culture, as far as like, there's not a hierarchy, we're all in this together and we're all here to make each other better. And so one of my upperclassmen was starting to get pretty amped up on the field and getting riled up about something. And my freshman calls out, she says, in for 3, out for 4, just like Sid. Everyone kind of laughs, but my upperclassman breathes in, breathes out. She just needed that little check, and So I think it's creating that culture to where it's okay and it's seen as a positive to basically help each other on the field. And if you have something I got from Dr. Colleen Hacker, many, many years ago, was basically having short, simple phrases that even come with a hand motion. So basically, she uses the words adjust and adapt a lot when things aren't going your way on the field. And she would always use her hands. She would go adjust and adapt. So she had this hand motion. So even every time she said adjust and adapt, she would do a hand motion. And so you basically have these key phrases that are, allow your teammates to be able to say on the field, hey, adjust and adapt. Or even like they can see you from the sideline, hey, Jeff, adjust and adapt, and immediately, it's that trigger. So I think, and repeating things a lot in training, repeating things a lot in games that are those key phrases, and then it's easy for your team to keep each other accountable or to see you from the sidelines, or to have a great way of communicating those things that you're wanting them to, how you wanting them to be.
Yeah, and just those little rituals. We had a player who would miss a chance, and I would tell him to brush it off. So he'd physically brush off his shoulder, and this was with young as 11 and 12. Now I'm going to unmute a gentleman, Steve Otto, all the way from Mississippi. Hopefully he doesn't scare, but he had a great question, and I want to let him ask it. Okay.
Excellent.
So Steve, I've unmuted you. Please go ahead and ask your question.
Under pressure.
No pressure, Steve. We know you've got a face for radio.
By the way, I love your 12-week program. What kind of team building activities or conversation starters, or whatever they may be, to fit into what you already do, the mobility, the visualization stuff, do you suggest for the younger players, specifically U13 and below, to help negate or mediate the anxiety that these parents have projected onto these players in returning from COVID?
Excellent. Yeah, I think, with team building exercises, oftentimes, in my experience, the sillier, the better. Putting them in a situation to where they are, they're having fun because it's something silly. I'll give you an example in a second here, but, or even like something where they're going to probably fail, like maybe it's a water balloon that has been dipped in soap, right? And so maybe it's really hard to hang on to, so it's slipping out of their hands, and you divide them up into two teams or whatever you want to do there, and the objective is to get all the water balloons from one to the other, and they're slipping out, so they're going to be laughing, they're having a good time, but it's full of failure, and giving that opportunity for them to fail together and find a way to be successful together. And that, and basically, depending on the age, allowing them to work through it for a certain period of time, and then if they're not really able to work through it, then kind of stopping. Hey, what do you think about this? What do you think about that? Try this way, try that way. But giving them something, again, like I said, kind of the sillier the better, but yet with a purpose. So that's what I often do with all age groups that I've worked with, is something that doesn't feel soccer related, and so it kind of gets their brain out of, okay, I'm here and I have to do, this specific thing. And it allows them to be able to kind of work through things from a different angle, if that makes sense. That doesn't mean you have to do your whole practice. But whatever it is, if you actually want to reach out to me even and email me, just Rachell@themindfulproject.ca. I'd be happy to give you more ideas and talk to you about this more, because I love doing team building stuff and finding essentially what it is you're specifically wanting to work on, and being able to incorporate that into some silly game, and then for them to be able to find the kind of the meaning behind that and help them kind of work through things. But all the stress and everything, I think, is the fact that with this, everything's always changing. And right now we think life is changing, but I think helping them recognize that they actually are dealing with change all the time. Every year they have a new teacher. Every year they have new classmates. Every year they have whatever it is, they're taller, they're, whatever, their body is constantly changing. So helping them kind of settle in the fact that right now it feels like everything's changing, but they actually have dealt with so much change in their life already that they didn't even realize, and they are resilient. And so I think encouraging them with that. But like I said, as far as team building, if you want to shoot me an email, I'd be happy to chat with you more about that, because team building is my jam.
Lovely. Love it. So passion is our core value, and we've seen it this whole webinar. But just would it be okay, do you think, Rachell, to let people know that, hey, yes, there's things that are changing, but many things are staying the same, right? Everybody's focusing on what's changing, but focusing on what's staying the same. Now, I think in the last last webinar that we saw you on, you threw out these statistics, and I know that 72.46% of statistics are made up on the spot, but you talked about that out of 100%, people look at 30% in the past, 60% in the future, and 10% in the present. Am I right in saying that?
Mm-hmm.
And then how, what exercises can you give so people can be more in the present, taking notice, engaged? So I'll give you an example. Yesterday I drive home and my wife says, hey, did you see the rose bushes? And I'm like, no. She goes, well, I planted them because you like them. So then I go back around and I look at the rose bushes, and they're budding and they're blooming yellow and red and just lovely. And I never took the time to notice on my drive home as I went by, So what can we do to be more in the present and maybe get that 10% to 15, 20%?
Right, absolutely. Yeah, and that I hear you on the stats, but that one actually, like psychology, that's a Psychology World one, and they've tested thousands and thousands of people on that one. It was kind of an interesting study. But with that, it's just starting to notice it. Like, for instance, you said you realized you didn't even see, these rose bushes because your brain was elsewhere, understandably so, because that's the thing is we all have so much going on all the time, no matter our age, right? We have things that we're thinking about. And so we miss what's going on right in front of us. And I think one of the biggest things is it's literally just noticing it. That's the first step. And when we notice it, it's not beating ourselves up for it. It's just saying like, oh, congrats, I caught myself, right? I caught myself thinking about something from the past. I caught myself thinking about what might happen in the future. I'm sure you guys are getting questions every day about when things are going to be normal again, or when you're going to start training again, or when, right? Like, I mean, everyone's asking, or, for me as a college coach, are we going to have a season? Like, I don't have a crystal ball, right? Like, I don't know the future, but we sure are projecting a lot of ideas on what it may or may not look like, and a lot of stress and anxiety can come from that. And I'm not saying don't plan for the future. That's not my point. But what I'm saying is, like, just noticing when we are, getting lost thinking about things that aren't in the present moment, that's not productive. And so noting it and then finding something to bring our presence back. So for instance, for you, maybe it's like, okay, every time I pull into my driveway now, I'm going to notice, what the flowers look like, right? Or for me, when I'm driving, my brain can go elsewhere. So I start saying like, okay, I'm going to pay attention to, the vehicle in front of me, or, and see if I can notice something different on my drive to work. Well, when I used to drive to work, right? But whatever it is, it's oftentimes in our most, like basically the most mundane things we do is often where our brain goes elsewhere. And so I think just the biggest thing is just catching it. And again, you're not beating yourself up. Catching it is a win. Gold star for catching yourself, and just bring it back to whatever it is you're doing. For me, sometimes it's maybe even if I'm typing, it's like looking at my keyboard for a second, or feeling what my pen feels like in my hand. And that can kind of bring me back to that moment of what I'm doing.
Brilliant. Brilliant. Steve, I know you had more questions, and I know that we're getting close to the end, and I don't want to keep Rachell. I could talk all day and listen.
Yeah, I think one of the important questions, because Chris said we have some players on here, so student athletes, all the schools now have adjusted and adapted their grading system. So some schools are going to use the grades from the previous 3 quarters. Some schools are just going to give it pass or fail. My wife is a school teacher, and I see on the conversations that she's having with parents and colleagues, and conversations I'm having with colleagues and some of the student athletes I'm working with, there's become, I guess we could call it a fixed mindset, because there is no need to challenge themselves to get a higher grade if they're going to already have a B+ or an A from the previous 3 quarters. Now, I'm wondering if what we're seeing is a fixed mindset, or if there's something possibly even deeper due to the current situation where depression may be setting in, and they don't feel that need to perform anymore. So it's just, what the heck. So it's not really a question. It's just a conversation.
Yeah, I think there's a lot there. Like you said, I think for some kids it's their growth mindset or their fixed mindset showing. I think for some kids it's depression. For some kids, we're actually with the Mindful Project, we've done a 10-week program that's free on our website that's just specifically kind of helping students deal with this COVID situation. And so this week our theme is actually effort. And we're talking about the fact that they've put a lot of effort into things that got canceled or didn't happen. And that can be really frustrating. That can be really depressing. And it can make you not want to put effort into other things. And so in that theme, we're talking about the fact that effort is never wasted. Because you think you put a lot of effort into something that got canceled, but really, what did you learn through that process? Well, maybe you improved your skill at something. Maybe you just learned more about something that you'll use later. You don't know when, but it's going to come up later. Or maybe it's just continuing to learn that endurance or determination, because you learned something through that process. And so a lot of times, we feel like, well, that I tried really hard at this. It was wasted because it didn't actually happen. So why should I try hard at something else? It doesn't matter. And I think it's helping students understand that what they're doing right now, it does matter. And what they're putting their effort into, essentially effort is contagious, because if they start putting a lot of effort into something and they're excited about something, it's going to make someone else excited about something and someone else excited about something. And all of a sudden, you no longer have this boring class situation where you're like, why am I in class? Because my grade doesn't matter. And all of a sudden, you're now excited about what you're doing. And it can be contagious even to the teacher. Obviously, I'm sure your wife is probably feeling like, nobody cares. So then, it's just this whole circle. So I think it's an opportunity. We chatted right before this. But I think it's just, it's an opportunity to have that discussion of basically, who are we when no one's looking? Who are we when there's no grade? Like, this is about helping them develop who they are. Because, are you going to be someone that strives to be at your best regardless of if the standard is lower? Are you going to strive to do more because that's who you are? Or are you going to basically just sit back and say it doesn't matter? It's actually an example that we gave. We said in this week in our program, we're talking about, we might get in this habit to where we give less effort because we're like, oh, it doesn't matter. And then all of a sudden we get an opportunity that we actually don't get to do because we didn't give the effort to basically allow ourselves to learn or grow with whatever the tools we needed to be able to experience that opportunity. We just don't know the future.
I think that's huge. And I don't know whether you're familiar with Bill Beswick, the English applied sports psychologist, but he always used to say, play for the person in the stands, right? What are we doing Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday? What are we doing when no one's looking? Which is huge, right? And that should become ingrained in our DNA. Do not alter, but play like every game like it's your last and stuff like that, because we never know when things do change, even though they're changing all the time. So I think that was
Absolutely.
huge. If the audience has questions, please type them in. I want to be sensitive to Rachell's time. I didn't call you Dr. Rachell that time. Steve, if you have another question, we're going to come, if we have time and you're up for it, Rachell, to our a couple of questions that we usually ask, and then some quick fire if you're up for it. Steve, did you have a question?
Yeah, it's not really a question. When I listened to you and Erin talk, you talked about durable memories. And I think that's something that I've been trying to focus on with the players that I'm working with. And if you could just expand on that a little bit.
Absolutely. So durable memories are those memories that they almost are like stuck there. You almost can't get rid of them, right? And I kind of liken it to like maybe, an advertisement or something that you heard over and over and over. You weren't even trying to memorize it, but man, it just won't get out of your head. Or every time you hear something, you automatically think something else. Like those are those durable memories that are stuck there. And that's what we actually want to do with things in life that are going to help us. Like, things like mindfulness or things that, you guys as coaches are wanting them to learn, in this situation, I want you to do this. And we want to create those durable memories. And the way we create those when we're learning something new is the more avenues that we can, the more inputs we can have to learn that thing, the better we're going to be. Like research shows that if we see something, if we read something, if we hear it, if we experience it as far as like the tactile, like the hands-on, if we have to reflect on it. And then something that I didn't talk about in that webinar that you saw, but also forgetting is actually a part of it. So for instance, a lot of times we want to do something every day so we don't forget. But in reality, if we do it, maybe you do something Monday, Tuesday, and you don't do it again till Friday, you actually have to think and reflect on what it was to be able to do it again. So you don't want to wait, like too long. But if you allow a little forgetting to happen, it actually makes your brain work differently to have to go back and find it, or to have you remind they're working, oh, what was that, what was that? And then if they either remember or you remind them, it actually helps create that durable memory. So there's that element of forgetting that's actually a part of the process of creating durable memories.
And then obviously as we get older, we forget a lot more than we remember, right?
Yeah, but then there's the things that you're like, how do I remember that?
Yeah.
There you go. Those are durable memories.
Brilliant. Thank you. So, Rachell, what advice would you give to your younger self?
I think I would tell myself that you're on the path you need to be. Because I think so often I tried to control so much when I was younger. And if my life started going on a little different path, I would fight so hard to get it back on the path I thought I needed to be on. I couldn't have imagined the path that my life took, and I am so grateful that it's taken the path it has. And if I think it's just essentially like you're right where you need to be, and stop stressing about making things go the way you think they should go.
So be patient and forgive yourself.
Yes, absolutely.
Right? Brilliant.
Yeah.
What would you say is the best investment you made in yourself?
Besides marrying my husband, I would say my graduate degrees. So my master's degree and then my doctoral degree, I think absolutely best investments that I have made in myself.
Brilliant. Steve, did you have another question?
Yeah, just real quick. We're all adjusting to new social and cultural changes. How can we incorporate mindfulness into these, what we would now call non-traditional practices, where we're working with players online, and how can we connect that to the future when we do go back out?
Right. I think it's starting to incorporate these concepts of what they can do for their own, I don't know if self-help is the right word, but self-care, I guess we want to say. What they can do with their own self-care because they're not together, and then incorporating that self-care in as a unit. So for instance, helping them be more aware of how they're feeling, because acknowledging that right now, they probably have feelings that they are not used to having, because there's benefit to being together in community, right? We need that as humans, and they're not getting that right now. They're also not getting the same exercise they would normally get. They're not getting the same maybe productivity that they normally feel as a part of that team. And so as you're doing this remotely, helping them learn to understand themselves better, which will then relate when you come back together. So help them understand that it's okay to feel how they're feeling, acknowledging how they feel, even talking about it. I don't know if you guys are doing this already, but talking about maybe what they're struggling with as a part of not being able to be together, and making that okay to talk about. I think and then when you come back together, even like when you do come back together, it's not like they're instantly going to just feel a certain way. Like having that be a part of the conversation of like, how are you guys doing? Right? Like, and helping them be more self-aware now when you're apart will help them, you guys as a group, be more self-aware when you come back together.
Brilliant. You know, I work with 9 and 10-year-old boys at the minute, and we ask them, they've been hosting the webinars, and some of the script is as well, what are you finding tough? What are you liking about it? And they're talking about it, right? And of course, you know, some of the boys are pulling their faces, but you know, we are talking about it. And you know, the boys often say, well, we're not together. I said, yeah, but we're together now. Mm-hmm. You know, so very insightful. So here's another question for you, right? Song, soundtrack, or movie best describes your life? And everybody is Groundhog Day right now, but what song, soundtrack, or movie would best describe your life?
I actually, I would say The Secret Life of Walter Mitty. I don't know if you've seen it. But it's one where this guy basically goes on this incredible journey to basically solve a problem, you would say. And it's with Ben Stiller. And I think that that's for me. Like I am very much someone that if there's kind of a roadblock in my life, or there's something that might stop other people, I am one that is going to find a way around it. And even if some people might find that to be extreme or be like, that's ridiculous, I can't believe you're doing that. I'm like, well, if I want something, I'm going to find a way to make it happen. And so I think that's kind of where I would relate there on that.
Brilliant, brilliant. And then sixth dinner guests, dead or alive? Who would they be?
That was a tough one. Yes, that was a tough one. So Joan of Arc, Maya Angelou, Pia Sundhage, Barack and Michelle Obama, and Bear Grylls.
Oh, okay. Bear Grylls, because then you know that you could survive anything, right?
I just think he'd be an interesting person to have a conversation with.
What would be on the menu, and would you be cooking? That's the question.
Well, yeah, so I'm a huge fan of Baja style tacos. I grew up on the West Coast, and something I miss. I'm currently living in Indiana, and I miss the Baja style tacos. So I would have that. I'm also a big fan for dessert, dark chocolate or some sort of lemon, dessert. So those would probably be the on the menu. Some guac and chips with the Baja tacos.
Baja tacos, yeah. We had I was out in California, and we had taco nazo, the fish tacos, and I've never found anything like that since. But I feel you. So real quick, we're going to finish with some one-worders. So I'll ask you some questions. You get one-word answers.
Okay.
Mindfulness.
Breathe.
Breathing techniques. Mindfulness.
Yeah, calm.
Soccer.
Passion.
Brilliant. Canada.
Erin.
Growth mindset.
Vital.
Positivity.
Perspective.
Multitasking.
Overrated.
Yeah. Brilliant. Brilliant. Steve, did you add any last things?
No, I just watched The Secret Life of Walter Smitty a week ago, and I thought it was fantastic.
Yeah.
I'm going to have to watch that.
Yeah,
I'm going to have to watch
it kind of helped me come back down to earth a little bit.
Yes, I rewatched it just a couple weeks ago as well. I've seen it several times, but there's something calming about it. Like
I'm going to have to put it on. But listen, Rachel, we can't thank you enough. Everybody that joined us, everybody will watch this later. Thank you. Rachel, do you want to share how people can get you again? I know you said your email, and I'll put it out as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, my personal email is just Rachel, Rachel, at mindfulproject.ca for Canada. So just Rachel at mindfulproject.ca.
And then I can share that as well. But then there's also a 10-week free course that you said, right? And there's this one question has just come in as a buzzer beater. It says, how important is the parents' role in motivating their children during this pandemic? And this is for maybe younger children, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, or children.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the parents' role is vital because they're the ones that are day in and day out with their kids. They know their kids the best. And so I think parents, first of all, recognizing that it's okay for the parents to be struggling, like everyone's struggling through this. I think it's acknowledging your own feelings, your own emotions, and you don't have to, be tough for your kids. You can acknowledge how you're feeling to your kids. But I think it's an opportunity for parents and kids to grow together. I think this has created a very unique opportunity for that. So I think it's very vital, but it's also an opportunity to be real with your kids and grow together through this.
Absolutely, and I think that's a great place to end it. My good friend Steve over there, we were on a webinar together, and he says, remember, not only we will get through this, we will grow through this together. So
absolutely.
Brilliant, brilliant. So Rachel, was there any questions, and you seem to have froze on my screen, was there any questions we maybe should have asked you, but we didn't? Oh, Dr. Rachell has froze. Steve, can you hear Rachell?
I cannot.
Okay, she seems to have frozen. Everybody, listen, thanks so much for joining us. We couldn't get to say goodbye to Dr. Rachell. I'll do that via email. Next week, May 21st, we are joined by Scott Mills of Partick Thistle and the Scottish FA on session design. And then on May 29th, we are joined by Amy Price for video game design sessions. So Amy's with the FA, Scott's with the Scottish FA. So we look forward to having you guys and joining you. It's unfortunate that Dr. Rachell froze. So that means now that Steve gets the last word.
Let's grow through this together.
Fantastic. Thanks, everybody. See you next week. Bye-bye. God bless. Steve, I'm ending it, and I'll call you in a second.
All right.
Thanks, brother. Bye.